Good morning, everyone. This is the scrap meeting for January 13th. Our first item on the agenda is to discuss the items from the November 5th scrap meeting that we still needed to discuss. So our first item is the question of why can't F for novel be used and can this be changed? So from reading the catalog wiki, it looked like the language was that one is recommended and preferred over F, but that you can use your cataloger's judgment. So given that this is not an actual requirement, does anyone still feel like this language on the catalog wiki needs to be changed? Feel free to unmute yourself and speak.
If F is allowed, then that's fine.
Okay.
Yes, that's my issue. I don't know why one is preferred, but if F is allowed, why not use it?
Okay, great. Does anyone understand why this was added to the catalog wiki? So Michelle said it had something to do with the Polaris facets. And Deborah said that there used to be a way to choose just fiction or nonfiction in the previous catalog. So this was a way to make that work properly.
I'm sorry, when you said Polaris facets, did you actually mean Cersei facets?
So Tammy said she thought it interfered with novelists, and Michelle says no, it did not have to do with the Cersei facets.
Okay.
So before in Symphony, we had a facet in Enterprise that you could select fiction or nonfiction. And then of course in Polaris, we have the facet for literary form where you can select nonfiction or any of the other values. And when we moved to Polaris, database management, I think thought it would be nice to have some kind of consistency. Either all of these items have the 1 for fiction or all of them have F for novels. And so then the question was, which one should we use? And they thought that the term fiction was what people were used to selecting in the facet. So we went with 1 fiction.
Problem though is that not every mark format has a fiction, nonfiction fixed field element.
Exactly.
So
they were aware of that. Yeah, it's just for books, but
right.
They knew that at the time.
Well, I mean, you know, if we present a facet that just says fiction, nonfiction, I think that's misleading. Because it doesn't include audiobooks, playaways, DVDs.
Well, the literary form facet is already there.
Right.
And it's just for books, right?
Yeah, and like, I don't know, there's one other format that like maps or something. Wouldn't be maps, but yeah, it's mainly for books. So it just seems like a lot of work to be changing valid data.
But your macro changes this in Connexion, right?
It does. It doesn't. I don't remember whether it does or not, actually.
It does.
Oh, that's too bad.
Please don't change it.
Well, what happens when we get a different catalog? Then all that data is wrong. Well, technically it's not wrong, but
we're making a similar change with the audience, changing ABC to J.
Yeah, and for the same reason, I think that's a bad idea.
Okay.
Oh. Not everybody uses the macro, and so we're not all doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Well, since The language is clear that it's just recommended and not required. Are we okay to just accept it as is and move on? Yes, okay. So the next thing on the agenda is the issue of the 028 and the practice of not using the 024 for video game platform numbers, and whether this still needs to be followed or not. So I'm not sure what the actual history of this is. Does someone remember what the history of this issue is?
Yeah, I think back when OLAC was putting together their guide for video games, they had suggested that platform numbers would go in 024, but when we were looking at it, it seemed like it was difficult to tell what is a platform number and how is it different from the publisher number. And at the time, we just thought, oh, maybe it would be easier if we said anything that's not a UPC, just put it in 028. And so that's why we decided to do that. But then OLAC came out with their guide that said to put platform numbers in 024, and so we started seeing that more and more in OCLC. And so that now my question is, should we just follow what everybody else is doing and not be trying to change these numbers from 024 to 028? And a lot of people probably aren't doing that anyway.
Both of those fields are indexed, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So Michelle said she catalogs a lot of video games and has not seen the platform numbers in the 024 and OCLC records. And is there something that she's missing?
I'm looking at, I'm sure others have done this as well, but I have up the 024 in the bib formats, and it certainly doesn't define it as a use like OLAC does. It's simply a standard number or code published that can't be accommodated. So is that just OLAC's guideline then?
Isn't it considered a standard number, like an other standard number?
Right, standard number or code published on an item that can't be accommodated in another field. But so I guess then we're saying that the platform is standard number, right?
Right, that was, I think, OLAC's reasoning.
That's their interpretation of that.
Mm-hmm.
Who would use these numbers? I don't know about video games, but why are they important?
I would think only catalogers or acquisition staff would use them.
So do we care? Because if we don't care.
Well, I'm sure people who are cataloging care because it helps them figure out which record to attach their holdings to if there's a choice.
It may affect deduplication if the numbers put in 028 in one record, but 024 in another record. It wouldn't deduplicate right away.
But they'd probably be using UPCs for that, right? For deduplication.
I would
Probably, but it might think that the number needs to be looked at if it's in the UPC field. I'm not sure how that works. But when you do search for the number, you'd be searching it as a standard number in the find tool. So I'm not sure if it really matters which field it's in.
I would agree with that statement and with John's that it doesn't matter if it's no 024 or 028 really, as long as it's in the record.
So if it doesn't matter for searching, does it matter which tag it's in?
Not to me.
No, both fields display in the catalog. And if users don't care, that doesn't even matter.
So do we actually need to make any changes to the catalog wiki, or is everyone okay with leaving it as is?
I would remove the sentence because as it is, it's a local practice. So I would eliminate the local practice and just say follow standard cataloging, whatever you interpret that to be.
Do we need to make a motion for this? Or do you want me to just go ahead and remove that sentence?
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, and interestingly, it's in paragraphs or it's sort of set aside already as if like, not only disregard, but like, do we even mean this? It's kind of interesting in parentheses. I would say just remove it.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the next item on the agenda. So the next topics to discuss are the ones based on the November 11th CAM meeting. Is there a benefit to adding an additional tag to vendor catalog records for identifying them? So I have discussed this with Deborah, and I reviewed both of the standard account procedures for Indian Trails and Evanston's. I did find 2 recommendations to the libraries for areas that they could improve to meet the CCS standards. So I've emailed them about that. And I've examined the records and can identify them based on the information that's there, from the information about who created the record and the file name. So it's not exactly in the records per se, but it's in the properties. So at this point, if you do still feel like any additional tags need to be added to it, that we would need to discuss it at CCS further. And as with any other records, any quality issues can be addressed by emailing the help desk, and we'd be able to identify it if it came from the vendor, if there was any question about it. And so is there still any interest in adding this tag to the records, or do you feel that it's okay to just use the existing information of the properties to identify the records?
I'm sorry, I don't remember quite the background of what was the interest in, I mean, just a little context for the,
Sure.
that.
Sure. So at the previous CAM meeting and in previous scrap meetings, we had been discussing the issue of the quality of the vendor cataloged records, how there were times where the quality wasn't as good as we'd like. And for example, like missing 655 fields or a missing 830 field. And so when those do get imported and sometimes are overlaid over the lower level records that have already been cataloged to a final level, it could cause a potential problem. And so I think that the issue came up because they were interested in making sure that we could identify which were coming from the vendors and which were not, so that we could review them for quality.
Is it part of the issue of, I mean, I guess I was confused because we had the discussion about changing the bib level to stop that.
Right. So that would definitely help by stopping that. And I guess potentially that when they would save their record, it could still have a possible issue with quality, but the two issues I did recommend to the libraries were statements about 655, adding the series, and also a statement about how to handle the volume for the item records. So that should help when they can update the account procedures to improve the quality of the records.
Hey, Rachel, about the 655, I think one thing that had been mentioned at the CAM meeting was that the vendor could not add 655s if they weren't already there. Could you confirm, is that the case, or is that one of the things that you're talking about that they are adding?
Indian Trails had a very thorough section on 655s in which they had a translation from GSAFD to LCGFT and had a specific list of 655s to add. So I'm not sure like how good they are at actually adding them, but I did recommend it to Evanston to add that same language to their catalog. I mean, to their standard account procedures.
And also, could you maybe bring up to CAM, make this part of a standard thing where if somebody sets up vendor cataloging, that they run the SAPs by CCS for you to look over?
Oh, can you repeat that?
Yeah, could you maybe make it a standard part of the process when a library sets up vendor cataloging, that they run the SAP by CCS staff to look over?
We can talk about that. I'm not sure where we would want to make any statements about that.
Okay.
Would we want to put that in the catalog wiki or just try to just be aware of any new libraries that would use Baker and Taylor?
I think just being aware would be enough, but it seems helpful. I mean, seeing the documents that were shared with us, it's pretty substantial, and there's a lot of places where things could fall through the cracks, it seems like.
And it would be helpful, especially if by not doing that, you're affecting existing records, existing local records, like overwriting existing data.
Okay. So based on the surveys, we don't anticipate anyone in the next year using vendor cataloging, but it's possible in the future that they may want to establish an account. So I can talk to Deborah and see what her recommendations are for creating a procedure. And maybe we could just create a document. I would assume that maybe they'd want to contact us with any questions when they would set it up. But we could potentially create a procedural document.
I just wanted to clarify really quickly about the 655s. Indian Trails does have certain instructions, like if a record contains Christian fiction, to also add religious fiction without deleting Christian fiction. But what CLS can't do is create 655s out of whole cloth. They can look at what's in there and we can give them an if then statement about 655s that are in the record already. But if there's, say, a historical fiction novel that does not have a 655 for historical fiction, they won't just add that.
So circling back around to this agenda item, what would happen with this additional tag? How would we use that?
I guess it would just be like in some sort of 9xx field, and we'd be able to just use it to see quicker than looking in the properties. I personally don't think it's necessary because if you look in the properties, you can see the file name, And the file name for those vendor records do begin with MOM. So I think it would just be eliminating the step of looking in the properties.
Vendor records ever have OCLC numbers?
They always have OCLC numbers.
Oh, okay.
We're not talking about the on order records. We're talking about final records. So they do always have OCLC numbers.
Okay, got it.
All right. So I think we can move on to the next topic. So the next topic was reviewing BIB standards related to the encoding level. So as we had discussed in the previous CAM meeting and scrap meetings, the encoding level is used by the import profile to, for those who do use the import profile, that looks at the deduplication settings that match the encoding level in order to reject the equal level record or to overlay over a lower level record. And this can be helpful because the vendor records can be imported and overlaid over final records that have lower encoding levels. So the question is if we should require the encoding level to be full level, or if we should leave that to the catalogger's judgment to make their decision whether they want to change it or not. And Deborah did do some research and found that Pinnacle does require their final records to be full level. So there are some libraries that do require it and others do not.
Didn't we determine that even making it final will not prevent overlay?
No, the setting does reject equal records. So anything that would be a full level record, so that would be an I, a blank, or a full level L record would trigger the rejection of an equal level record. So if it was lower than that, the incoming record would overlay over it. So if someone left their full level record as an 8 or an M or a K, the incoming record would overlay over that. So we did have some suggestions already that John could update his macro. Is that something that you have plans to do?
I think, Jamie, is that already done? I know I do it at my end.
I don't remember.
Okay. Yes, that's it's very easy to, it's one line. It's super easy to make that happen. Again, there isn't even 100% of the catalogers that displays using macro.
So is anyone interested in making a motion about this? Because I feel that we would have to make a motion to change the requirement since it would be related to this BIB standards.
I don't really see the need for a new requirement here. I don't know. I haven't seen the problem so far.
Okay. All right, so let's move on to the next one. Should Virginia's criteria for microarchive files be changed so the 945 be removed from the requirements? So she would then use Bob's criteria to create files and that he uses for OHM to use for the microarchive.
And I haven't looked at, I was going to have Bob run a a new SQL thing for me so that I could test how it works and, you know, put my current criteria against his and see which one, see if his works fine. So I haven't quite done that yet, but that's something on my agenda for this week, to ask Bob to start working on a new SQL thing for me. And I would use the OM stuff.
Okay, so the benefit for doing this would to remove the requirement to add the 945 field. I think that even if we did remove the requirement, it's already in their on order profiles, and they probably wouldn't bother changing it anyway. But since Virginia is going to be doing some more research into this, I think we should see what the results of her research are and come back to this next time if we need to.
Exactly, that's what I was going to suggest.
Okay, so the next thing on the agenda is to discuss the results of the past and CIRC-ILL advisory group discussions on the serials that are cataloged as monographs. So both groups did discuss the topic at the last meetings, and they both were interested in continuing to catalog these serials as monographs and to not change anything to the current practice. They have decided that they are happy with the current practice and want to change everything as little as possible. They think it would be better for the patrons to continue it this way. And one of the groups was also concerned that any additional changes could lead to staff intervention that will be needed if the patrons had to place any holds at the item level. Jamie, would you like to add anything?
I might just clarify, you're talking about the thing where it's a serial record and we change the leader from S to M.
Yes.
We're not talking about travel guides and stuff like that are on monograph records.
Right, although there are the old travel guide records that are still in that state.
Mm-hmm.
So are there any other thoughts on this topic, or are we okay with just moving on, since PASS and CIRC have decided they want everything to change? I mean, they do not want anything to change.
I would just ask, could we also then add this workaround somewhere in the wiki to show that we're doing it?
I think I did make some statements, but we can review it, and
Okay.
I'll send the information out to the listserv, pointing it out, and we can discuss if it needs to be changed. Okay, so the next thing on the agenda is if the list of cataloged serials in which they're cataloged as individual monograph records, like the travel guides, test prep books, if that needs to be expanded. And so I was wondering if there were specific categories that you felt needed to be added to this list besides what the existing categories are, if there was a way to identify it, or if you would have to identify these title by title.
Did someone already ask to expand the list in some way?
I think it came up at our last meeting, but if there are no any thoughts on this topic, we can just move on. Okay, we will move on. So our next items are reviewing the catalog wiki pages that are under review. So I completed a document in a chart that lists the links for the new RDDA toolkit pages. And so I was wondering where you thought the best way on the catalog wiki to mention it would be, where it should be linked. Should we link it on the BIB standards page or in that separate resources section? So here is the document that I've created. I did add some additional links to it. I found a document that has a full list of how Mark 21 aligns with the RDA elements. And so for some of these like creator elements, there's just too many pages to add to a chart. So that's why I've added this link. I've also added a link to this in the RDA resources box on the first page. And so one of the other examples too was the 511 field where it was just too long of a list. So I've added just to see alignment documents for a full list of elements. So basically what I was just thinking of doing was just putting a link to this document in the wiki.
I mean, so you're talking about the page that's called online cataloging resources as one option. I mean,
that is one option.
I mean, I don't see why it couldn't be in two places. I mean,
right. We can add it in as many places as you'd like.
Well, I mean, it does seem make as one, the online cataloging resources page under general RDA, right?
Right. So there's this box, additional resources. And there's the bibliographic input standards. So I could potentially put a link right here where the detailed field requirements are. But I know that this is something that's been approved as it is. So I wasn't sure if you wanted to add just a link to it or if that would be okay. And then there's the online cataloging resources page.
Yeah, that's the page I had up. I mean,
That would fit well.
I mean, my first reaction would be no, because that would not be the page that I would be looking at when I would go, hey, I would looking for more information on this thing that I'm looking at.
I think it should be in more than one place, but I do think that this page, it should be here.
Okay.
But I agree. I mean, it's not necessarily the first place, but it is. I mean, otherwise, what's the point of this page? But I mean, by the bib format input as well, no?
So the by the chart on the bibliographic input standards page.
Where, I'm sorry, I'm not sure who that was speaking. Was that Sandra? I mean, where would you look for
Okay.
it?
So this is Rachel. So I was thinking that we could just put a link on this page that by detailed field requirements, maybe like as a last line before the chart. Would that be okay?
And by me.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, so the next thing on the list was brought to us by John Galdoon. He was interested in changing the requirement to not use the 240, but instead use a 700 with the subfield A, subfield T, and subfield L with a subfield I note. So this would allow the field to connect to an authorized heading, but the 245 does not link to an authorized heading.
40, yeah. But most catalogs, I don't think the 240 really links out that much either. So
Horizon did, so that's what we've been used to for the last years.
I don't think Symphony did.
Did Horizon link as a title or a name title?
It would combine the 1XX with the 240 to link to the actual Uniform Title Authority record.
Wow,
Hmm.
that's
That's nice.
It doesn't look like John is here today to discuss his point of view. Does anyone else from Indian Trails, looks like Sandra is, are you the only one from Indian Trails here today?
I think so.
Okay, well, Sandra, have you talked to John about his point of view of this?
He has not mentioned anything to me about it. I think it's just a matter of that's what we're used to, the 240 linking.
Okay. So I have discussed this with Deborah, and it does seem like it would be a lot of extra work to change this requirement, and we're not sure that other libraries would be interested in doing this. Does anyone have any other interest in this?
I mean, I don't necessarily see the point because not every heading in our catalog is linked to an authority record because not everyone has an authority record or one downloaded, and it's searchable regardless. So
as I looked at this, I made it a new problem. I have issues with the way name title headings appear in our author browse index. I'd like to discuss that. I know we're going really fast here. I don't know if you wanted to discuss it now. It's kind of a big topic. We could wait till the end or whatever. But it's related, but it kind of isn't. So, however the group would want to do that, it involves re-indexing.
I think we should put that at the end if we have time.
Sure.
Because our next issues on the agenda are just reviewing some more of these pages under review. So we still have pages to discuss. I did add some more pages to the list that I found, and some of them are new pages that I created. So I think we should move on because I don't think this issue of changing the requirement for the 240 is something that people are that interested in. So the next thing on the agenda is to review authorized access points for musical works. This one was one that still had AACR2 rules in it. And is there anything here that actually needs to be kept on this page that's local practice, or should we remove the page?
Actually, the page is local practice saying
Okay.
not to follow RDA. We want the 1XX to be for the performer.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're explicitly saying don't follow RDA, keep doing what we were doing in AACR.
No, it's possible I just saw the reference to AACR2 and just automatically marked it as review.
Okay.
So I think we could probably.
Oh, yeah.
Well, should we clarify that so we don't end up in the same position? That we're following AACR2 on.
Well, I'm not planning on doing it again anytime soon. But
I'm sorry, John, what?
I'm not planning on going through the whole site again anytime soon, but.
Well, but for somebody coming to this page and saying, oh, why are we still following AACR2? I mean,
Sure.
Just, I don't know. I mean, I guess there's a date of review at the bottom, I assume.
Every page has its entire history. If you put question mark action equals history to the end of the URL, oh, you just click the history. Oh, you just click the history tab and it'll show all the revisions. So
we might want to at some point take out the AACR2 language and just write out specifically what we want to do, because it's entirely possible now we're far enough away that new catalogers won't even know the AACR2 rules.
Right. I think that's a good idea, just to remove those statements, but leave it as is. or
I did find it confusing that says to disregard AACR2, which, I mean, we are disregarding AACR2. We should be up to disregarding RDA right now.
Oh, right. Yeah, if we just call this a local practice, we don't have to. We can call it our own.
All right, I will go ahead and update that. Okay, so I created this new page for the encoding level guidelines that explains how the import profile works and recommends changing it to the level I or blank to prevent the work from being overlaid by an incoming record. Is this ready to be approved, or are there any other changes that need to be made to this page?
Isn't OCLC updating and changing the encoding levels?
Yes, they will be allowing everyone to use blank, but I will still be possible if you want to use I. So I did make the statement here in the first paragraph that as of 2020, all participants are allowed to use blank and 7.
Sorry, the participants were overlaying that part of the screen and I couldn't read it.
Oh, okay. If you want to take some time to read this, we can move on to the next one and discuss it either in email or at the next meeting.
I mean, I feel like you've captured the discussion well in what you've written. I thought.
That sounds fine to me.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Next one is literary form. So I had removed the images and was there anything else that needed to be changed on this page? So the language here is that it is recommended for novels to be coded as 1 instead of F. Does anything else need to be changed for these statements?
I don't see anything.
Okay. So I think we can remove that from our pages under review. So the next one was the mark field 945. So I think I needed to change the mark of quality, but I haven't done that. I think we were still trying to decide if we still needed to require the 945 or not. So we can come back to that one. And the new page I created on merging duplicate records is done. Was there anything that you saw that needed to be changed, or are we ready to approve it as is? Since there are no other comments, or is everyone ready to accept it as is and then move on?
I am.
Okay, great. So I'm Let's see, one more in the chat. Yes, okay. So the next page is the new page on OCLC connection export settings. So this basically just says to make sure that your settings are Mark 21 and UTF-8 when exporting from Connexion. Is there anything else that needs to be added to the page?
I don't think so.
Okay, great. So then I added another new page to say that the OCLC should be in brackets in the 035 field. Mostly because this was helpful for the queries to make sure that we actually had an OCLC number in that field. Is there anything else that should be added, or is this okay as is?
This would be a Polaris specific rule. Do we have that category?
I'm not sure.
If we do, add it. Otherwise, it's fine.
Okay.
What's the Polaris part?
Well, this is just, I mean, it didn't matter. It didn't matter in workflows because they put the OCLC number somewhere else.
Well, we did we not need OCLC numbers in the bib record? In the
No, I
35?
assume the point of this page, though, is formatted.
Yes, so when OHM reads the OCLC numbers, they're okay with it not having the OCLC in parentheses, but for us to make sure that there actually is an OCLC number in the record, which is really only a problem in the older records. So that the query that Bob uses looks for that to make sure that there is an OCLC number in those records. So
I thought OHM did need the prefix.
It's okay with not having a prefix. It looks at anything that would be like OCM as a prefix without the OCLC, and it does look at numbers without the prefix at all. That would just be numbers. But Bob actually uses I think his query actually uses the way of identifying the prefix to know that it's an OCLC number to send. Because we do have numbers like old bib numbers in the 035 field, like old Searsy numbers.
And old Polaris numbers.
Yeah, and old Polaris numbers. So it's easiest to identify the OCLC number with the prefix. So if everyone's okay with it as is, we can move on. Okay. So the next page is online resources. So I saw it has this note to not follow these rules, and they're being kept for historical purposes. Do we still need to keep these for historical purposes, or can these be deleted?
I don't see why we couldn't delete them. I mean,
Do we still have any records in the database that follow these rules? That's usually our principle is if they exist, if the records exist, someone might come across them. That's why we keep the rules. But if the records are gone, then I don't actually remember why this got tagged.
There are some very old electronic resources records, so I could conceive of them being in the catalog still. I think we're hearing John talk on the phone or
I
something.
think you could delete the page.
Okay.
I did not edit this page, so I cannot contribute.
So it sounds like we're okay with deleting this page. So the next one was the retention statements for periodical holdings. I think we still needed to do some research into this. So we're not using these 866 fields anymore, but retention fields are elsewhere. Should we completely just delete this or update it for current information on retention statements and keep something about retention statements in the catalog wiki?
Well, this page seems, I mean, very specific to the 866.
Right.
So there doesn't seem to be much point in keeping it. Because in order to update it, you basically deleting everything on the page, right? I mean, and starting
Right.
over, so.
Right. Do we need a page on our current retention statement policies?
The reason that all of those 866 fields, the reason that's there is because we used to create a union list from that data. And there got to be a point where we just, we didn't care.
Well, there were just too many.
Well, actually, it was that they were getting, the list was getting shorter and shorter, I think.
Oh,
Maybe it was the issue. I mean, there is a page, I think called Union List, where there's a list of all the old ones just kept for fun. But we're not doing that. And I don't know if there's any desire to create a separate web page for a Union List.
Is there anything about retention statements that needs to be standardized?
Not if we're making a list. Not if we're
No.
not making a list.
I've seen some libraries put retention statements in the call number field of item records, but that's probably because they don't use the serial holdings record.
Right.
So I don't think it necessarily needs to be standardized. And this can just be deleted then. Okay, so this list of retrospective projects.
That hasn't been updated in a couple of years.
yeah. I think that could be deleted.
Yeah, you could check the history tab. I think a lot of those were done, you know, at a 753 for, you know, change tagging genres from 650 655. I think that's stuff. So,
Oh, change fictitious characters, still a good thing to do.
Okay, I will go ahead and delete that.
Are there any retrospective projects that could either be updated or added for catalogers working at home?
check old macrofix records. That might be an interesting report.
Change fictitious, there's still some fictitious characters that are 650s. Usually because the authority record is 650, but.
Isn't there a list of projects somewhere on the portal?
Yeah, there's a list on the learning portal. So I think we could delete this, but if you have any thing that you'd want to add to the list on the learning portal, we could do that instead, since this really isn't something that needs to be in the catalog wiki.
Honestly, I wouldn't have thought to look for it in the learning portal either.
I can send that out to the list. Occasionally we put that in the newsletter or send it out to a CATS listserv. So the next thing was the software, computer games, and video games page. I did just add the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X to the 753 list. I think that was all that we needed to do on this one, was to review the report of the 753 field. I bulk changed any that were not following this practice, and then add anything new to this system details section.
There's also the O24 thing, but
Right.
I don't know if you want to take that to Cam first.
We can do that. And last on the list is the uniform titles page. So this needed to be reviewed to identify if there were any local practices that need to be added. And if there were not, we were discussing if we should delete the page.
Well, they're not called uniform titles anymore, right? They're preferred titles.
Yes.
Okay, so at the very least, the page has to move. And that's probably all the farther I got when I tagged that. But whether there's anything useful on it or not is another issue.
Okay, keeping in mind that it's been a long time since I've cataloged fairy tales, and it's also been a long time since we were a member of CCS the first time. But I remember there being like a local practice regarding fairy tales to field out English.
This grim
People
fairy
wanted to
tale
need to
section.
be there.
Yeah. I remember that too. I don't remember the details.
I do too.
I feel like the National Authority file takes care of that.
No, there was something beyond that that CCS was doing that was not like a national standard to try and, you know, concatenate every single variation of, you know, Cinderella.
Well, if none of us can remember, maybe it's not that important.
I do remember making lots of local authority records for a lot of the fairy tales with the English with subfield L.
Which is
That was a
national
while
practice
ago too.
in most cases. I mean, there is an authority record for Cinderella.
Right.
130 Cinderella.
There is, but we were using it differently than the national practice.
Okay. Yeah. I don't remember. This is it.
And this still has an AACR2 rule number here.
Mm-hmm.
So is this another case where you chose to just follow the AACR2 practice and not switch to an RDA practice?
I think this page has just been around since AACR2, and we didn't know it was there since then. If not, like John said, if none of us know of a local practice here, then we don't have a local practice.
And I don't really understand the Hansel and Gretel example. It may, was there and is there a special rule for Grimm? Because they didn't really write them, they just collected them. I don't know.
Again, if none of us are aware of it, then no, we don't have a rule because we're not doing it anyway.
Yep.
Is this something that we still need to do more research on?
Possibly. I was just going to ask Virginia if she could look up one of the fairy tale authority records she created so we could see what it says.
Oh, they were just real local ones, really short ones, nothing fancy. No real research.
But I remember there being an instruction in them.
Right. Virginia, could you help with some additional research onto this topic to
Yeah.
See what happened in the past related to local practice on uniform titles?
Sure.
Thank you. And we can put that on the next agenda. Okay. We do not have any more pages under review, so now we can discuss anything else if you're interested. It is 10:30, so if you want to put John's topic of how the name title headings appear onto the next agenda or talk about it now, it's up to you.
I'd be fine with hearing about it now.
Okay. And John?
Okay. Let me, hopefully you'll still be able to hear me. I'm going to switch over to my desktop where I'll have actual keyboard. And let me see, can I, well, oh, okay. So the discussion about dealing with 240s. Can I share my screen?
Yes, let me stop sharing my screen. But John, I see that you're appearing as if you're on a different camera and not on your computer.
Right. This is complicated here.
So you may need to log in on your computer.
Oh, that's right. Well, well. Okay. You need to enable screen sharing for me. Unless, well, I mean, I could walk you through it if you want.
Okay.
Just bring up a catalog.
Could you tell Rachel something to look up in the pack?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying? Oh, okay.
Yeah. So if you could do an author browse for John Williams.
I'll switch to displays.
It needs to be a browse. And it'll need to be Williams.
It'll be the other way around. You have to go Williams, John.
So the problem with the 240s is, unless we can do what Horizon did, the 240s are not going to appear in this list. So I'm talking about John Williams, the composer. This is quite a list.
Mm-hmm.
And if a user got here, so let's say, and this is probably, I have a better example. Let me give you a better example, a more simple example. Do a search for Beatles.
Oh, the Beagles?
Oh, did you say the Beatles?
Beatles, yes. Yeah, this is, yeah. So,
Sorry. Beatles with an A.
Hard to type when everyone's watching.
there we go. Okay, yeah, I know. Okay, so So there's your list. So if a user comes to this page and they say, oh, hey, I want to check out Abbey Road. If you click on Abbey Road.
This Abbey Road?
Yes. You don't get Abbey Road. Because the Beatles CD Abbey Road does not have a uniform title. Uniform title is technically in the 245. So this is going to be a problem. And if you click on Sgt. Pepper, you're going to get the same problem. You're not going to get Sgt. Pepper. There's two problems going on with name title headings. Sometimes they list things that the work is, and sometimes it's what it's related to, and rarely do you get what you want. Again, you're not getting Sgt. Pepper.
Hasn't that always been true of every automated catalog since the birth of automated catalogs?
Yes, it has. It's the problem. It's the problem of not dealing with uniform titles properly. It's partly the 240. It's 700s, and you can. And back to the John Williams example. If, for example, you wanted the guitarist John Williams, you're going to have to page pages and pages and pages of stuff just to get to him. So what I'm suggesting is not indexing the title portion of the name titles, because it's always going to be inaccurate. It's always going to be incomplete and confusing.
Well, not always. Your list had plenty of examples that have the name title for the work. That's going to take you to the work.
Well, in the Beatles examples, it doesn't. The problem with classical music, though, is, so I have a single record. We don't have to look at it. We know what it looks like. It's Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Well, there's a 240 that says Symphonies number 9.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to show up in the list of named titles under Beethoven. If you scroll through hundreds of headings to get to Beethoven Symphonies number 9, it's not going to be there because that's in the 240.
The cataloger could add a 700 name title for that. Right?
They could.
Yeah.
But are they going to add one for Abbey Road also?
They could.
They could. Or we could just not index it. Because I don't think this list of Beethoven is helpful because it's not complete. It's not inaccurate, but it's not complete.
Never has been ever since in other systems either.
Well, if you index the title portion. Is it possible to change the settings on the training server, on the training database?
I'm not sure. I'll have to talk with Deborah about that.
Ideally, what we could do is just change it in the training and then update a bunch of records and see what it looks like.
But it would, you know what it would look like? It would just list the author's name, right?
Yes, and I think that's more helpful.
Rachel, could you?
Than this list.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was done. Go
I
ahead.
was just going to ask if Rachel could tell us how approximately what % of searches are browse searches in the past.
I'm not sure. I'll have to ask to see if there's a way to look into that.
I think we have gotten some kind of a number before. It's very, very small.
It is very small. So rather than changing our cataloging, let's just make one change to the index.
Remember, we don't totally re-index unless, because it's such a lengthy process with Polaris, that we have to wait until another library joins up to do it.
Sure, but we could put it on the list.
Yeah.
You know, I have from like a year ago, I asked to reindex the series, to take out the title portion of that, and that just sort of fell off the table. You know, I mean, if we make the case for it, maybe Memorial Day we just reindex. Nothing else is going on. That's down the road.
It takes 3 days to index, though.
Okay.
I mean, do we know, I mean, I know, John, you suggested doing this on the training database, but I mean, what might we lose? I mean, you're specifically finding things where it doesn't work, but whereas Jamie pointed out, there are places where it works just fine. So, I mean, I would be curious about what we might lose.
Well, okay, so the heading for Beethoven, what you want is in there.
This first example.
Let's do a search for Stephen King. So, okay, now I have not looked at ahead of time, so I'm guessing here. What is going to be in the 11/22/63 heading?
It's just the way it, as
Okay.
a movie.
So that's the movie, so it's not the book. And the Spanish one, I think it's because on Prospect likes putting in 700s and 240s. They probably just don't. Okay, go back to the list. You know, I don't know. Not a Stephen King reader, but so don't smoke. Bag of Bones again.
Probably just DVDs.
Yeah, you're not going to get to the books. Whereas if you click on Stephen King, I mean, yeah, we're giving examples that have 900 hits, but you know, you confess it to books. There's ways to get at it. You can't get at the books from the name title headings.
Keyword will get it, though.
Right, and that won't be affected by a reindex of the browse index.
Okay, I will talk to Deborah about the possibilities of doing a test on the training server and ask her for the percentage of the searches that are browse searches. Okay, is there anything else that we need to discuss today? Okay, so I will be sending out a form for all the attendees to fill out to the CATS listserv so that we can take attendance. And if there's nothing else, then we are ready to adjourn the meeting for the day. All right. Is everyone else ready to adjourn?
Yes.
Great. We'll have a good day then.
Thanks, Rachel. Bye.
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 Rachel,
Yes.
just a clarification on the indexing. I'm not asking you to re-index the training,
Right.
just to change the settings, and then I'll just mark edit a hand, like all the Beethoven records or something, just to see.
Right.
It wouldn't be a drain. And it might be interesting to find out if we only for example, if we went live with this, if we only re-indexed the browse author field, maybe that doesn't take 3 days.
Okay, that makes sense.
So that was a lot to throw at people, you know, there, but it came up when I was looking at us adding more 700s, and I thought, well, they don't really work. So, okay.
Great.
All right.
Have a good day, everyone.
Bye.